Welcome to our Global Days of Service Storytelling Summit. Thanks for joining our workshop. Today it's titled Channeling the Narrative, Art as Medicine with Ricardo Levins Morales. My name is Ani Loudon Karkula and I'll be moderating today's session. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ricardo, who will introduce himself and kick off the workshop.
Right. Once again, I'm Ricardo Levins Morales. I'm pleased to be with y'all. If you're not feeling too shy and are able to turn on your cameras, it'd be nice to know who's there. Again, no pressure. So be it. So I'd like to introduce the concept of medicinal art, and I'm going to be sharing pictures with y'all. Most of what I'm going to do is share some pictures, and then we can have some discussion. But before that, I want to lay the groundwork a little bit, kind of to decode, right? It'll give you a decoder key to understanding what's to follow. First of all, I'm a visual artist, and art is a form of communication, right? It's a kind of storytelling, which means that its purpose is to get you to feel something, think something, or do something. That's basically it. And even if you're making art for your own self, it's still a form of communication. It's even if it's just to remind yourself of something that you feel that you want to know. Now, I've come to think about social change in kind of a three-pronged way, that it's about stopping damage that's being done, replacing what's causing the damage, and healing from it. Right? And healing is something that's really inherent in all living things. My organizing mantra is that the soil knows how to heal itself, the body knows how to heal itself, the community knows how to heal itself. And really that happens, and whether we're talking about coral reefs or salmon rivers or human beings, the healing kicks in naturally once the toxic assault is blocked, right? And the toxins that keep us down in society are lies. So when I'm working with an organization, with a community, with a family, the diagnostic question I ask is, what is keeping this group of people from feeling powerful? What's getting in the way? And I don't mean what's the external oppression. I don't mean what is the boot on their neck, though that's really important, but really what is it that's been internalized in the community that keeps people from pushing that boot off their neck, or even understanding that that's what's going on. So in healing, as in art, you never know until you sit with the patient what's needed, right? So you need to go in with your bag full of medicines or herbs, prepared to raise a fever or lower a fever, stimulate memory or energy, put somebody to sleep, support the immune system, whatever it is that's required, right? And in social justice, that means being able to polarize a situation, depolarize it, awaken memory, create solidarity. And as we go through the images, I'll be showing you like a grab bag of some of the different ways in which, at least I've used these concepts in this art in a variety of situations. That said, I'm gonna share my screen and start showing pictures. Okay, so this is my research cow. It says begin with research, because that's always where it starts, right? Anytime we're doing any kind of effort to change anything, in fact, when you walk out into the street, right, when you're getting ready to cross the street, one of the things you do, at least I hope you do, is look both ways and make sure there isn't a bicycle or a bus or a car coming down on you, right? That's research. Or if you walk into a room, a classroom, any kind of social space, usually the first thing you'll do is kind of look around, listen around, get a sense of what the vibe is in this place, what's going on, anything you should pay attention to. That's research, right? So, and in all of the organizing I've done, That's what I've learned over the years. And we can do it well, we can do it poorly, we can do it intuitively, we can do it systematically, but we're always starting out trying to figure out, well, what's going on, WTF, what's going on here, so that we can move on. In the interest of research, this is who I am. That's a drawing of me standing out behind the shop that I'm sitting in now. And inside my shirt is a picture of the house in the Puerto Rican mountains that I was born into. Another scene from my neighborhood, young people bringing water up from the valley below from the spring. I'd sometimes accompany my friends, but our house is up on the top of the mountain, so we collected all our water from the roof, from rainwater. My sister and I, well, she's living there now actually, but we've always gone back ever since we moved to the States. And many years ago started a process of doing posters about people in the community, because we realized that the stories were not being passed from generation to generation. And you can't expect people to fight for a community if they don't understand its value. This one says, I'll just translate, where do we come from? There are those who remember, ask them. And memory is a natural resource of Maricao, which is our home area. And these posters just started stimulating all of these conversations between the elders and their grown children with the little kids listening. This one was a tribute to this man, Toto, in the picture, and a picture of the coffee hacienda that he started working at when he was 12 years old. And of course, poorly paid and exploited. And when my daughter and I brought this picture into the community, we were told that Toto had died a few months before. So with his family's permission, we released it into the community, and some of the branches of the family used it to create little altars. And this is sort of, I'm going to be jumping back between scales, right? This is a small personal scale of the impact of art, and we'll go to larger ones. This one I also created for Puerto Rico, says no se vende, it's not for sale. After Hurricane Maria, you had a lot of Bitcoin billionaires, real estate developers, and other predators from the US swarming in to buy up farmland from desperate farmers who had lost their crops to the hurricane. And this is a reminder that our homeland, our heritage, and our soil are not for sale. We moved to Chicago when I was 11 in the late 60s in a time of turmoil. This is a woodcut I did when I was 12 years old. Not everything I did when I was that young is a keeper, mind you. But that's of Angela Davis, who was on the run from the FBI on a framed up charge at that time. I moved out of home when I was 15, dropped out of high school, started drinking. But what I credit with buffering me from the worst impacts of trauma is that there were social movements that were there to catch me. And social justice movements are explicitly to restore power whose power has been taken away, which is your elevator definition of trauma healing, right? And so for me, that was a very healing experience, which is why I'm passionate about, if you're involved in social justice organizing and it's depleting and draining you, there's something wrong with the way it's being done. Fred Hampton was a leader of the local Black Panthers when I arrived. And I have a picture, made this tribute to him because he modeled a way to bring in different communities that are usually pitted against each other with a story that was big enough for everybody. So instead of asking why these white street gang kids were, figuring out how to contain and sort of neutralize them, what they asked instead was, why are these white kids hurting in a system that privileges white folks? And they made an alliance based on the injuries of class and poverty. Nothing about us without us is for us. That's a slogan from the South African disability rights movement. And it's simply something that I like to have out there as a reminder of a fundamental principle of social justice and social change, other people making decisions about our lives. That's not how it's supposed to be. When Trayvon Martin was murdered by a vigilante in Florida, people asked me, are you going to make a poster about Trayvon? And I was like, I don't know. Bad news is that there are racist killings all the time, right? It wasn't clear that this would be a turning point. But then I went out and looked at, well, what's out there? What are the images? Because a lot of art was being made about Trayvon. And what I saw was that the flavor of all that art was despair and frustration. It's like, we've been going through this shit since the days of Emmett Till, and nothing ever changes, right? That's true. For a brief moment, that can be cathartic, but it's not medicinal, right? So I went out and I found this quote from legendary civil rights organizer Ella Baker that talks about, yes, this continuity, but we're looking ahead to a time when this will no longer be the case. It just has that element of hope and agency, and that's where the medicine comes in. In our bodies, a lot of what's going on, people are suffering from cancer, people are suffering from diabetes, from common colds, from viruses. And what really facilitates that is systemic inflammation. Our bodies are under so much toxic attack that our system is just inflamed all the time. And I consider hopelessness to be the systemic inflammation of our culture. So that whenever I'm doing a poster about a particular issue, that's a specific injury, I'm also trying to treat that underlying systemic inflammation of hopelessness. Because otherwise you can say all you want about some issue, but if people are feeling like just getting drunk or zoning out on TV, you're not really doing your job. Bosses, beware. When we're screwed, we multiply. Cute little bunnies. And I'm showing you that because this is another way in which art has been effective in my experience. I was part of a group that was putting out catalogs all the time. We were printing T-shirts. We had this as a T-shirt, cute little white bunnies on a red shirt. It was the most, adorable little thing, right? Put a puff additive into the little white bunnies so they puffed up. Oh, so sweet. When we put out that catalog, I got a call from the postal workers in Connecticut, in Danbury, saying, we need 300 of those shirts right away. But please print the bunnies on the back, put the logo on the front, because we sit in this big bulk mail center at our little computer stations. And to make a long story short, they had signed a contract with management a few months before that promised that if they closed that center, everybody would get replacement jobs within something like a 30 or 60 mile radius. A few months later, say, hey, we're closing the center, and hey, really sorry, but we couldn't find those jobs for you. So people were demoralized, they were angry, they were scared. Wearing these shirts was the first action that they had taken. So that morning, 300 workers went in wearing these shirts, feeling pretty upbeat. Management sent them a threatening letter saying wearing those bunny shirts violates our zero tolerance for violence policy. Violence, right? Cute little bunnies, but it sort of escalated from there. The national leadership of the union came down to picket right when the Postmaster General was going to come visit. Management backed down, said, we overstepped, you can wear whatever you want. And by the way, we just happened to find those jobs, right? So here we're talking about making an intervention in a concrete situation of polarized struggle that helps to tip the balance in a particular direction. Not because it's a brilliant piece of art, but because it's the right acupuncture needle in the right place at the right moment. I won't dwell on this except to say that this poster, it's about organizing, just a lot of organizing tips. Got a letter from a woman who was part of the first wave of women in the building trades in this area. And she was saying that she was in a workplace running heavy machinery in a place where the male workers were not very happy that she was there. The male union leaders were not particularly supportive. And you can bet the company bosses weren't either. So she was feeling pretty isolated. And she said she had this poster up in the tool shed. And whenever she was feeling down, she would just go and stand quietly in front of it and say that reminded me of why I'm doing this. Right? Big medicine, small medicine. I'm going to show you this just because it's cute. See, Descended from dinosaurs. Everybody needs cute. So that's medicinal too. This was a poster I made when the big Ordway Theater brought in the Broadway play, the racist Broadway play, Miss Saigon. And organizers in the Asian communities got together to organize against that. So this, I paired that with Gone with the Wind, which is recognized for its racism, and turned it into Miss Saigon with the Wind. Turned the theater into the Ignorway Theater, blah, blah, blah. A lot of little references and messages embedded in that. The image is actually the old Gone with the Wind poster with the stars of the Broadway show photoshopped in, and scenes from Vietnam replacing scenes from the South. And the organizers made these into glossy little postcards and handed them out, dressed up nicely, and handed them to theater goers along with information on the back. I'll read this one to you, right? And maybe you can sort of do it as a call and response, but keep yourselves on mute, right? If you give me a fish, you have fed me for a day. If you teach me to fish, then you fed me until the river is contaminated or the shoreline seized for development. But if you teach me to organize, then whatever the challenge, I can join together with my peers and we will fashion our own solution. Okay. So you're probably familiar with the one that I'm kind of poking holes in, right? If you give a man a fish, you fed him for a day, right? And for a lot of people, until you hear something like this, you don't realize how patronizing that other one was. But I guarantee that for the rest of your lives, you will never hear that other quote without thinking about this one, even if you can't remember the words, right? And maybe similar quotes, patronizing quotes, will become more apparent to you. And that's just an indication of the power of this stuff, right? It's sometimes a simple reframing can just shift the way we think about something if what is being reframed is just something that we've never thought to question. This I did in support of organizers who were protesting Amazon's collusion with the military and with immigration and deportation agencies. This was a collaboration with a chosen cousin of mine, a chosen relative who's works on indigenous environmental issues. And this was a call and response she created for a march in her area for the missing and murdered indigenous women and girls. And you can go to my website because I don't want to linger long enough for you to really read it. But it was just a beautiful thing. As soon as I read it, I got in touch with Simone and said, oh, can we make a poster of it? And that's something that she hands out now every year up in Bemidji, Minnesota, when they hold these events. This was done for the Minneapolis effort to get people to participate in the census. That's the Hmong language version. There were various ones. Since I suspect there may be some teachers on this this call, I'm sharing this for your benefit. Adjunct faculty, please help. We'll teach for food. Enough said there. This was the first of a series of posters I did around New Orleans. And this is the thing about beginning with research, that sometimes you can reach out and ask people questions. That's one kind of research. In this case, when Hurricane Katrina hit, no one had phone service, and no one had, everyone had bigger things on their mind than talking about a piece of art. So I just pulled this out of my heart, right? The lyrics say, they're from an old Southern spiritual: if living were a thing that money could buy, the rich would live and the poor would die. Right? It's just sort of, it's sad, but it's dignified. And I thought, well, best I can do is do something from inside of me and feel that my relationships with people there are strong enough that it'll probably resonate. And it did. One local leader said in the weeks following Katrina, as they started pulling things together, any organization that still had an office had that poster up. And firefighters from Chicago and Kansas City told me that when they were done going down on work brigades to help clean up, their hosts would give them framed copies of this poster. You just never know. You never know where the impact that you have. This was a later one that I did for the Day Workers Congress there. The Latinx workers who had been brought in to rebuild the city, mostly undocumented. And when the city was rebuilt, the local authorities decided, oh, just noticed for the first time these people don't have documents. Now that their work is done, we don't need them. Let's have them deported. And at the same time, the Black anchor community of New Orleans was trying to return to the city, only to find that the housing projects had been razed to the ground, the Black teachers fired, the schools privatized. So these communities were being pitted against each other about who represented the real New Orleans. And so the organizers said, no, we're going to make a campaign called The Right to Remain with Dignity that includes everybody, and worked with me to create the poster, which they put in store windows, gave as appreciation awards, put everywhere to create the framework for a container big enough for everyone. It's that same lesson from Fred Hampton in Chicago, that when people who are fighting for their needs and are fighting against each other, then they're not asking a big enough question, because a big question can turn competitors or enemies into allies. Put down the piece, take up the piece, put together the pieces. Again, this is trying to deal with the deep medicine, the deep lies about young people who are caught up in the street life, gang violence, etc. Speaking to them with respect rather than at them or about them as, you know, heartless predators or whatever, right? And if we can humanize people who are the most marginalized and criminalized in the public mind, then you're really humanizing everyone. You're saying everybody is precious, no one is disposable. Deep medicine, if everybody knew that, a lot would change. I'm going to move a little faster now because I have more slides than I really have time for. This again was about environmental justice. I found that most of the posters out there were really just data charts and didn't have the poetry and the resonance to really reach people. I'm an organizer. I bring people together so they can unlock the beauty, power, and wisdom that's in the streets and job sites and back roads. Then we get out there and demand the changes that our people need. What's your superpower, right? A way of shifting the narrative and making the life of organizing seem more magical and attractive than it's often depicted. MINNEAPOLIS, protecting wealth and whiteness since 1867. This was done during some of the Black Lives protests here after a young man had been killed by the cops. And again, I don't just report on things. I don't just want to make statements. I want my work always to bring something new to the conversation. So this is not just saying, hey, cops bad. This is saying, oh, they're here with a particular history and for a particular function. And that's what the tagline on the bottom says. And in fact, looking at that poster with some fellow organizers made us realize that the 150th anniversary of the Minneapolis police was coming up in 2017. And we started an organizing project that produced a 150-year performance review and history of the Minneapolis police that has had quite an impact on the local organizing community, and in fact introduced the concept of police abolition. So moving into the pandemic, this is, we're always looking at, well, what are we hearing from the field? What is the medicine that people need? This is a series, this is one poster, but also we did it as individual pieces that show friendly animals giving advice on what to do during a pandemic. Stay aware, support the most vulnerable, check in on each other, offer healing support, rest, accept your feelings, organize for a better world, etc. And what we've heard back, we hadn't realized that this would go around the world and, go multi-viral. But what we were hearing is that this gave parents, teachers, psychologists a way to talk to children about what was needed that was comforting and reassuring and not threatening, not scary. And one person made a hooked rug out of it. Other people hung them up as clotheslines in front of their homes. We translated them into Spanish and made coloring books out of them and coloring pages. All of these available for free download or for purchase. So people who felt like giving us money ordered them, and other people were free to just print them out and use them. More messages for the moment. This one I did especially for people working in the medical industry. It's a parasite classification chart, defining parasites as a creature that enters and attaches to a host organism, basically derives all its nutrients at the expense and doesn't benefit the host and often harms the host. And the four categories are protozoa, metazoa, arthropods, and health insurance companies. People who work in medical billing love that poster. No need to explain. This was another one we put out during the, well, we're still during the pandemic, but given that quarantine conditions can create an emotional high pressure zone, especially if there's already dynamics of abuse, this was to offer both support and some advice, ideas of what you can do to reach out for help in an abusive situation, whether you're the victim or are afraid that you might be the perpetrator, in a situation where it might not be safe to just get on a cell phone, make a call and so forth. And again, this was also made available for free download with a blank space for people to add in local hotline resources. We feel you. We are here with you. We are so proud of you, the ancestors. That was made in the midst of the uprising, whose epicenter, of course, was here in Minneapolis after the murder of George Floyd. Again, this one speaks for itself. Just a little bit of advice here. Seeds of resistance, grassroots mix will grow under any conditions and are best when planted together. And one thing that happened during the pandemic is that people started really seeing that their separate issues were connected. That mutual aid in the community and essential workers being exploited and police racism were all interconnected in ways that were not apparent to everybody prior to that. This is the zombie apocalypse that we're living through. Y'all know what I'm talking about. I just had to make that one. It's all about truth telling, right? You know, we counter lies with truth, whatever window that comes in through. I'll read this text to you. A wetland receives the water that flows into it and slows it down, allowing sediments to drop to the bottom. It absorbs the excess nutrients while plant roots and microbes break down harmful chemicals. Then it passes the water on, cleaner and safer, to those downstream. Be a wetland. Right, and without saying it explicitly, that's really about intergenerational trauma and interpersonal, right? Because the ways in which we're harmed, that we're tempted to pass on to other people, can happen laterally with our peers, it can happen with our children. And wetland provides us a model for how we can acknowledge the injuries of the past, but not replicate them. And here's my final piece for this conversation. In the end, all we have to offer is ourselves. And that's useful to know in social justice organizing too. We are the instrument that needs to be a model. It needs to be a tool. It needs to be a container for courage. And that's really the primary thing we have to work on, because that's what if we, no matter what oppressive systems around us we want to work on, or mutual aid challenges, we are the instrument that has to do that. And if we don't sustain ourselves, then the work that we do is also not going to be sustainable. And I'm back. So, and this is the time actually where I get to sit back and we can have a conversation. And I'd love to hear what you're thinking, what you're questioning. Yeah, what you got in your minds.
Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you have a question or comment, you can put it in the chat.
Hi, my name is Andrea. It was great to hear about your work. And I was in a health equity summit here in Houston, and storytelling and journaling and artwork finally is part of the discussion in regards to community health.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of community health workers have been utilizing artwork and journaling to help people deal with chronic diseases because so many people could not or did not have access to therapy, and in a sense, and so artwork became therapy. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Very much, very true.
Hi, my name is Pamela. I wanted to say hello. Your artwork is fantastic. I love the idea of art that transcends just the visual pleasure. So it makes you think, it makes you feel, it makes you want to learn more about a movement or a person or a community, etc. And not everybody has the words to articulate something. So looking at a poster and saying, someone sees my story, I'm not alone. So I think this is visual poetry in the most fabulous way. So thank you so much for sharing your work. I'm stalking you on Instagram now, so I'll definitely be checking out more of you and your shop and everything. This was fantastic. And also, just a tad bit, one of your posters has a Puerto Rican flag on the back, and I'm like, yes. Whoop, whoop. So so it's lovely to see also my community being represented out there, and it's just, this was fantastic. This made my day. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much. And just to comment on that bit about being seen, which is so much the medicine that we need, right? And that's also a good medicine for alliance building. When Fred Hampton organized with the white young patriot gang who used Confederate flags, part of the power is that him simply being able to let them know that I see what you're going through. And to feel seen makes you feel less in attack and defensive mode, right? But also it's a real challenge, because what I want, the most beautiful feedback I get is when I have a picture about something going on in Guatemala and a Guatemalan says, oh, have you lived there? Because that really felt right. Because there's a danger because especially when communities aren't used to being visualized and seen, that an artist can put out something that addresses their community and get a lot of gratitude back, even if it contains patronizing stereotypes, savior complex, those kinds of things. So really trying to build those relationships is really important to me, so that what's being reflected really feels genuine to the people who are in the story.
Hey, Ricardo. This is Isaac here. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. One thing that I'm always fascinated about in terms of the purity of this work and what goes into pouring into the arts, how do you balance on that line of monetizing your art? And, we put so much power into art, and then anybody sort of can go online and buy a shirt or take it and repurpose it and things like that. What boundaries do you create to stop that from happening?
Yeah, well, when it comes as far as sort of the monetizing piece, I don't know that I'm really anybody's role model. when I started out as a youngster, it was in a time when I didn't even sign my art. It was like, that was just one more way in which people contributed to the movement. Some people organized childcare, some people set up the phone tree, stapled picket signs, made drawings, right? I was part of a collective that came together in the late 70s, and we actually stuck it out for 30 years, ending in 1979 to 2009. And we decided early on not to look for grants, not to become a nonprofit. We could already tell how the problems of the way funding tends to steer the work that people do. And so we decided to avoid that, which meant that we also wanted to be accountable to the people we were serving, right? Not to funders. Now we paid a price for that, right? We even went through 2 winters with no heat in the building in Minnesota, right? I don't recommend that as an exercise. And slowly we're able to get on our feet and recover some early financial missteps. But it also allowed us to keep the truth telling strong. We never had to make compromises to be able to get funding or be excluded from certain spaces because of what we were creating in our relationship with community. And this has morphed over the years into a really stable little platform here. So we have a crew of about 7 or 8 people, all members of a union, and are able to provide our art at low cost. Art studios are often the cutting edge of gentrification. So when we moved to our current space a few years ago, and our rent was double what it was in this smaller space. It was like, well, the usual thing that businesses do is they double their prices. And we didn't want to do that, right? We want to keep serving the same low-income communities where our hearts are. So instead, we introduced a line of sort of high-end stuff. People can order the stuff on banners like you see behind me, on glass, on metal, on canvas, so that those fans who actually have $300 to drop on a piece of art can do that. And we're still maintaining our base, note cards, posters, etc., at affordable costs. We do allow people to take my art and use it as their profile pictures on social media, just so long as they link back to us. Often folks will be asking to reprint or use it in various ways. And we do a very sort of politically based sliding scale so that to encourage institutions with lots of bucks to share the wealth and people who can barely afford the phone bill to not feel shy about using it, right? We do like it when people ask. Sometimes people have sort of tried to claim my art as their own in opportunist ways, and we let them know that we're not happy about it. But also sometimes it'll be like, hey, somebody sends a message. We're organizing this environmental justice event on our campus. We really had to get this leaflet out. We used your piece of art. Is that okay? And we'll say, yeah, you really should be a little more diligent and contact ahead of time, but you're forgiven. Just send us a copy of the flyer for our archive. Right. So that's about as much as I can say. I mean, certainly we don't approve of somebody pirating it, claiming it's theirs and trying to sell it. That's only happened a couple of times over the years.
We have a question in the chat. Someone asked, what's the name of the collective?
It was called the Northland Poster Collective. And we did silk screen printing, and yeah, we produced buttons, mugs, bumper stickers, posters, t-shirts. And in fact, we're one of the main centers for art on labor history and union organizing paraphernalia for the labor movement, among other struggles.
Ricardo, I was wondering if you would be willing to, if you were going to give advice to someone who considers themselves like a novice artist, right? Aspiring or has interest in creativity, but doesn't really consider themselves as like a visual artist, but they're thinking about using it to get the word out about their work. Where would you recommend people start? Is it, contacting artists? Is this something that they could do on themselves? Like, where I'm just thinking of like somebody listening or watching this session and like, I could never compare with the work that you do, right? You've been doing this forever, you're a professional, and it feels like, what would Molly as a interest in creative have anything to do with you, who is like an esteemed, renowned artist? Could you bridge that a little bit for folks?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's the question of doing it oneself, right? And that's something that everyone has to think about for themselves. Sort of, does your skill level in this moment meet what you want to do, right? It doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but we'll get the idea across, get attention in a way that feels authentic. Remember, I'm a high school dropout, and the only art class I ever took, I hated in 5th grade, right? And I still would hate it if I took it today. It was really badly taught. But so that getting better at something is a question of the love of doing it and just doing it a lot. So anywhere you are in your life, if it's something that gives you pleasure, give yourself permission to not be a star and just do it, and the skills will follow, and the way I learned to do art was by copying things I liked. The same way we learned to speak as toddlers. You copy what you hear around you. I copied artwork, until I kind of figured out how that artist did that particular technique, and then I'd go copy something else from someone else. Eventually, it all couples together. In terms of working with artists, there's a lot of ways to do it. It's really a question of finding who's got what you want. So that can be looking at who puts themselves forward and is visible in the community as an artist, whether it would be physical or online community, and see if they want to do something for you. Or it could be, who are the closeted artists in your circle of friends. There are often people doing the doodling, right? And they might know something. And there's so much talent that doesn't see the light of day because people feel shy, or they weren't given the approval that you're a real artist, or that kind of stuff. And when it comes to creating something for your event, think about what is the essence, the core truth that you want transmitted about, if it's an event or a project or a book cover, whatever you want, and sit down with the artist and try to get that across. The truth is that not all artists are organizers or therapists. I really have tried to promote that process of deep listening, so that if I were doing something for you, I'd really want to get at the essence. If I'm making a cover for your book, this conversation. So I try to really do something that's about you and not about me. Not all artists have necessarily developed that skill yet. So it's a process of mutual coaching. You need to listen to what they want from you, right? So if you're working with a committee and everyone has different ideas, and every time you see a sketch of the project, everyone changes their mind, that's not artist friendly, right? Try to have the conversations up front so that they know what you want, right? And also make sure that they're listening to you.
Hi, I don't know if we have to raise a hand or something. This is Christine, but I am totally just touched by the artwork that I saw today and your story. And these are very sensitive topics, I have to say, very sensitive. And I like some of the terms you're using to show the story. My question would be, as an artist, is obviously there's always several lenses to a story. Seeing the artwork that you did is extremely touching, but it brings to mind the other side of that story. I'll use one example, and let's the Minneapolis police, just police in general. What's the other side of that story? Like, what I'm afraid that's happening is a development of a culture that's not saying, not everyone is like this. Let's look at these, let's understand different perspectives. And I think what you're bringing to light is a perspective. what I'm struggling with is there's great people out there with a perspective that no one is seeing, such as wonderful human beings in the healthcare field, in the police workforce, in the other avenues. That's what I would love to see is, as an artist, how do you decide what perspective? I understand your story, but
Yeah.
how do you also try to ourselves say, how can I step away from my beliefs, values? Not that I'm saying ignore my beliefs or
I
values,
think
but
I got the
do
question.
you understand what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful question. I appreciate that. And it's actually something that I think quite a bit about it. And the way I approach it is to think, where do we find the deepest truth? Okay, and I'll explain how that plays out in the police context. When I was young, one of my best training experiences was hitchhiking. I racked up a total of 26,000 miles just getting from place to place as a youngster. And I was already an activist kid, and I made two rules for myself. One was that I wasn't going to lie about what I believed, and the other was that I wasn't going to get myself killed. And these two goals can be kind of in tension with each other, right? But I give the example of a military colonel, an Army colonel, who picks me up. And he was what I would consider very racist, homophobic, nationalistic, xenophobic. And I felt that my challenge would be to find out how many geological layers I needed to go down to find common ground, right? And what I was able to pull out of him is that he wanted his children to grow up in a better world than he experienced, and he wasn't seeing it happening. The stories that he grew up with, both in his church and sort of the patriotic mythologies of the country, which were sacred to him, are being dismissed by other people. His children are having trouble getting a mortgage, and it's the fault of brown people coming over the border. So what I learned was how common people's values are, but it's the narratives that get attached on top of that that can be toxic. Now, my job is not to say, well, his toxic narratives are just as valid as my nutritious ones. They're, in fact, to go to that deep level to validate the hunger and the pain and the things that he's feeling, so that I can say, like Fred Hampton or the workers in New Orleans, I have a better offer. Now, in the case of the police, notice I didn't say all cops are pigs. It said Minneapolis police, the establishment of the institution, has always played a particular role. And the group that came together is called MPD 150, Minneapolis Police Department 150 years. We came together, and what did we do? We started with research. And we looked at the whole 150-year history of the Minneapolis Police Department and turned that into a report, interviewed people on the street, did contemporary, looked at future possibilities. And nowhere in that did we say cops are bad people. In fact, one of our members had a romantic thing going with someone in the police academy. Another one is the daughter of two cops, two black cops, I would say, who are sort of supposedly the answer to policing. So that the idea that this was about good people and bad people was not part of our approach, because that's actually part of the problem with policing. But the point here is that the institution of police has rigidly been about enforcing class power and racism since its inception. And in fact, the practice of Jim Crow to criminalize everything that Black people did and land people with prison records so that they couldn't vote, get good jobs, good housing, and preserve all those things for whites, that's still what they're doing. So in answer to your question, and of course that was just one poster, but it was significant that we said Minneapolis, protecting wealth and whiteness since 1867, not this is the cops, because we know, and we've talked to and had interaction with people who are have gone into policing for all the right reasons, who have gone in because they were abused as a child and they're really passionate about sexual abuse of young people and so forth, but they land in a toxic environment which has a tremendous criminal core to it. So that even when police are doing what's supposedly called law enforcement, stopping people for traffic violations, for other kinds of infractions, they're doing it through a racial lens. And so that means that in fact, those are criminal activities. It's not the fault. Like a black cop who stops a white businessman who's speeding, that guy's going to complain to the chief, take it before the judge. The officer might get a reprimand for being too disrespectful. But if that same cop is stopping black kids in the community, there's not going to be that blowback. So it steers people, institutions steer people into oppressive behaviors. And it has nothing to do with they're good people or bad people. And so that's the approach that I take it from. What is the deepest truth that we believe we can say is true? And it's never about demonization. And of course, sometimes people will react in various ways, but what we try to do with the art is say, here's a story that will hopefully bypass your defensive roadblock and checkpoint and speak to the heart in a way that humanizes people.
Hi, I have a question, and thank you so much for this presentation. I'm curious as to, was there an event, a time, a conversation where you knew that your artwork was making a difference in the lives of people?
Ooh. Well, of course, there's many times when I know that, but when you're talking about like a first moment, certainly I will say that I never imagined that this drawing that I loved doing as a kid was powerful, right? That could have an impact on the world. I was inspired by people who did cartoons and political art. I kind of intuitively knew it was part of conversations, but I think it just sort of slowly and organically grew on me. You know, if you make a wedding invitation for somebody and they're really happy, or a birth announcement, it's making a difference in a small way, right? And you see that and absorb that. And so it's not surprising when you do something for a rally and it makes a difference in a slightly larger way. Similarly, I also never decided to go out and I'm going to do political art. I still even don't think about it that way. I've just always done art about what felt important to me. And when I was 5 years old, that was chickens, because the neighbor's chickens would always be running across our land. When I was 8, it was pirates, because 8-year-old boy, pirates. And now it's resilience in the face of oppression. But it's always wherever my life has taken me in terms of what I care about is what eventually comes out in the art. And no, there was no aha moment. It just sort of became.
I have a question, if I may ask another question. This is Pamela. Did you had anybody inspire or plant these seeds of this is what's important to you? Like, for example, my parents were civil rights movements in Puerto Rico. I have friends who they do community work because they're children of young lords, etc. So there's always that, or those people, not just one person, that makes us steer in the route of community justice for our people. Do you have those examples of what created this for you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think my parents also are a major part of it. They were committed to social justice. They were also involved in the anti-colonial movement in Puerto Rico. And they were very sort of deeply committed, had this deeply committed kind of humanist revolutionary culture to them, so that they had no problem with the fact that they were working for changes that they didn't expect to see in their lifetime. There was that kind of patience, and combining that with the wisdom of the forest, right, which is all about patience and cycles and lag times, helped to shape my sensibility. Another thing, as my sister likes to put it, Our parents never told us what to think, but they taught us how to think. So thinking about things in complex ways, thinking about things where, as Christine, I think what said, where you're imagining what the world is like to the other person. All of those were values that we children absorbed, and that certainly I feel their presence in what I do. And then, of course, we look around and other people out there who are models that resonate with those basic foundational things, then we continue learning from them.
Thank you.
And I see we're coming to the end of our time, am I right? Yeah, so any last minute thoughts? I'm looking for how to save this chat, y'all, because I didn't get a chance to read all those comments, and I know y'all have been filling up the chat. Ani, are you able to send it to me if I can't get that down?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we do have access to that. We can do
Okay.
that for you. Yeah.
Well, I think we can is good enough for me, because that's what I got.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience for attending this session, obviously to our esteemed speaker for your inspiring presentation. This was a really great discussion, and I loved, seeing and being able to see the artwork that you shared with us today.
Hey, it's been a pleasure being with y'all.
Yeah. I'd just like to remind our audience members that tomorrow is our last learning event for Global Days of Service. It's titled Girls Empowerment in West Africa, a conversation with two organizations. It'll take place at 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, depending on where you are. We also hope to have your engagement in additional Global Days of Service activities occurring throughout the end of the week. In our GDS event site, you'll find activities like the Storytelling Hub, where you can connect with Walden community members and projects seeking volunteers to submit written and recorded stories. So check out your email to complete our event survey and have a great rest of your Global Days of Service week. Thank you.